Go.
All right, ready to go. Okay, we are having another session on how to optimize your fat metabolism, tips and tricks for the low carb athlete, the endurance athlete, and the aging athlete with Peter Defty. We're going to share some new research that they have conducted and helps us figure out what we can try on ourselves and figure out how to best burn fat, optimize performance, and of course, my favorite, longevity right now. As I turn 50, I'm all about what am I doing now to prove my future self? So, Peter, thanks for coming back on to share some new research with us.
Well, I wouldn't call it research. I'll just call it data collection because all the experts are going to trash that because I'm an empiricist and it's not technically research. What we're trying to do is collect some data to support all the anecdotal stuff out there that of what athletes are actually doing in the real world, right? This is these athletes that we work with are actually doing these things, but everybody says it's anecdotal. Well, now we've got some data to back that up, and the data does support exactly what the results they are getting and what they're saying in terms of how those results feel, what they think played that major factor. So
yeah, it's funny because I keep thinking of when I'm speaking at KetoCon this July, Austin, Texas, and how to fuel and train the low carb athlete. And I want to say, it's supposed to have research links and all this stuff to support what you say, but it's such an N=1 experiment. We can give these suggestions like a template. And here's some proven things that work for other people, but it all comes down to you are unique and you can take this information, apply it to your own training and fueling schedule. But it is not one size fits all, but we can take this information you're finding, data you're collecting on men and women, hopefully we can try, right?
Yeah. And even high carb athletes. So
yeah. So okay. So what we talked a little bit last show that just aired a few weeks before this one comes out. What is a study on and who are you doing it on? What are the
the first thing I want to talk about is we're all individuals, and that's really predicated on the variables that play into how we get our body to use what energy substrate. So it's like the saying, we're all the same, we're all different. So, in terms of basic physiology, there's the pathways are pretty much the same. It's just what we don't know is all those variables. And that's what makes you an individual, because nobody's the same. And it's also important for the listener to know that those variables are often very dynamic, because there's changes in environmental things or stress levels, and it's a constantly moving target. So that the context of individualizing it is just so important. But it does go back to this whole thing that we're meant to burn fat for our aerobic energy source. And that's been my thing ever since I started doing this in 2000. And so we've evolved this, but we've had all this we have all these quote unquote anecdotal evidence, but people poo-poo it as anecdotal. It's not a published study, right? And so there's a wonderful thing with Alan Savory where he talks about how you can't dismiss this, and this is where the academics go, and it's like you can't even talk to them if it's not a study. It doesn't exist if it's not a study. And yet science, the beginning of science is observation. You observe a phenomenon, and then you form a hypothesis, and then you test it and try to control variables. So back to your question, we've been trying to get data for years. In fact, in my podcast with Jason Koop, he's like, I can't find any data on this stuff. And it was kind of a little frustrating for him, but we've been trying to develop data, but our focus has been on the individual. So I work with athletes to get them results. And I've found that, as much as I believed in the VESPA product, and I believe in it even more today than I ever did, I knew it was one tool in a toolbox. And when we combine those tools, we could get these insane results on fat. right?
So stacking, I call it stacking.
Yeah, stacking. Okay. That's a trendy term. I don't know. I'm too old to know. But anyway, so when we combined all these in this got that synergy, right? That synergistic effect, not just the stacking effect, but the synergies, right? Where they actually multiplied each other. It was stupid, but everybody dismissed it as anecdotal. And then the trajectory, I'll give a quick rundown. The trajectory with us is when I took over as GM for VESPA, that's when I started to really dive into it, because we had athletes who were struggling and we had athletes that said it didn't work for them, and I had to start questioning. So in 2010, I met Steve Finney. I was put in contact with Steve Finney, and that's where he found a pool of people who actually were doing what he had a passion for, which was he knew that there was something to fat adaptation for sports performance, because he did a study in the 80s, and then that was when, of course, the food pyramid came out. So his field of research, which was ketogenic diets and still is, that field became toxic then. And literally academics had to leave that field of research, because that's when, the whole food pyramid came out. Right.
Yeah,
so fat was okay. So
demonized.
But he always had this passion for the athletic aspects, not just the diabetes aspects that he's working on with Verta. So when he found this, we did a study in 2012 that was never.
Hold on, I have this sitting here. But if people want to know more of what Volek and Finney, if you're looking on the video, this is the book that's kind of started all of this for us, is Low Carb Performance book. The art and science.
And back there on page 110, 113, they talk about Peter and VESPA.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
I have that marked somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I just forgot I was sitting here.
that first meeting led to some conversations, because he was curious about what I was doing, because he said, you figured it out empirically what this does. But he thought it was all about the diet, right? But he wrote, he profiled us in those books, and I was a reviewer for both the low carb diet, low carb living, and low carb performance, because Finney immediately understood that I understood the whole thing about restricting carbs.
Page 125, Peter.
125, yeah. So anyway, even in there, they talk about how we use more carbs than a straight keto diet.
Yeah.
So but that led to a study they did in 2012 at the Western States 100-mile endurance run, because this pools of runners. So we got a pool of runners that were OFM VESPA runners who were doing restricted carbs, and we had a pool of high carb runners, and they did this study doing cheek swabs and blood samples. The cheek swabs were done before, in the middle of the race at mile 62 at the 100K mark, and then at the end, and then for several days out. And then they took blood draws before, after the race, and then for several days after, and 3 days after. And then they sent these kits to everybody to take cheek swabs. The data was really compelling, but the study never got published, because Finney and Volek are probably some of the two top researchers in diets. And so they didn't want to publish it in a low tier journal. Right. But the data they saw, especially in the recovery, in terms of fatty acid, cheek cell, fatty acid compositional profiles, and how they just bounce back from the oxidative stress, were so intriguing that led to the FASTER study.
Yeah.
Okay.
The famous FASTER study, Ben Greenfield was in a lot of other top runners.
I recruited Ben, because I was the one that put Ben on to the whole thing of low carb. He actually didn't believe me, so I put him in touch with Steve, and then Steve said, well, if you still have any doubts, talk to Peter Attia, because Steve got Peter kind of sorted out. Yeah. And then because Peter and Ben were doing triathlon at that time, and that's when Ben really kind of jumped on that. But it became, so the FASTER study came out, and it showed that yes, humans can burn a lot more fat at higher intensities. The problem was the inference was that it's all about the keto diet.
Combination, isn't it? I mean, what are you coming down with that? It's it's not about all the diet, but
right. But the cohort were people who are elite level athletes.
Yeah.
And
not real people.
What's that?
Not people with real life schedules.
Well,
like
not
when you're a
that
pro.
they were performing in elite. Some of them had day jobs and all that, but the fact is the low carb cohort were almost, except for one or two people, I think one person, were people that the only person I never talked to. You know, I got Ben, Zach, Dan, Anthony, you know, all John Rutherford, who recorded 1.78 grams a minute. He was the highest. All those guys were mentored by me, and I can assure you, in the real life of race at the time, in the real life of racing and training, they were using strategic carbs and they were using VESPA to be able to win.
Mhm.
Okay, but the inference out of that was the keto was really the defining thing for the winning performance. And the problem is straight keto is a conservation state and you're not going to get the performance you need. Is it a tool? It's an important tool. Completely believe in being in a state of ketosis. But again, how a person gets there optimally, that's a very different thing. And when you look at the range of studies on ketogenic diets, until Faster and a few other studies, I mean, there's just literally a handful of studies until recently that were really well done on ketogenic athletes. 90% or more of the studies were done on either metabolically compromised people, like people with seizures or type 2 diabetes, right? Or overweight, or sedentary people. Well, what does that say about, this is important for people to know, what does that say about how the ketogenic diet applies to somebody who's highly athletic?
Yeah.
And it's that's where we use strategic carbs, because strategic carbs do make a difference. And the more aerobically fit you are, once you've made that switch to fat as fuel, the more aerobically fit you are, the bigger the carb tolerance is.
Yeah. So that's a good spot to pause and just recap on this important part, because people might hear, you know, we always talk on this. We've had like 5 podcasts together. And I think just to go over optimal fat metabolism, how to become fat adapted. If people are making that switch, they can go back and listen to our previous podcast, but just a quick summary of kind of 5 steps or whatever your steps are to become, you know, from the high carb to a fat adapted athlete that they need to look at doing beforehand, before they start doing a strategic carb timing. What is their process that you find, kind of a summary of those steps?
Well, they've got to go and do like a metabolic reset. So they're going to sharply restrict their carbs. And the way we do it is non-starchy vegetables you can have as much as you want, because they don't turn into blood sugar. But you want to avoid the starchy stuff, the sweet stuff, and you want to do a week or two. Depends on where you are. If you're a pretty fit athlete and you don't need to eat every 2 or 3 hours, or you don't need to take a gel every 20 or 30 minutes, you may take 5 to 7 days to reset. Whereas somebody who's coming from a total high carb athlete thing, it might take them 2 to 3 weeks. So it's 2 to 3 days to 2 to 3 weeks, depending on who you are and what you are. Because a really aerobically fit athlete, who's still metabolically fit, they can, in 2 to 3 days of just feeling off and doing really low duration, low level training, they'll feel off for those 2 or 3 days, but they'll make some huge gains, significant gains. Whereas, you know, that's the thing, the person that's fit and wants to optimize, they got this far to go. Person who's high carb, they got to go all this way. So it takes a while and takes some vetting.
Yeah. So really,
that's the biggest thing. And then you build your aerobic base.
But training at lower heart rate is what I was going to throw in. So fueling wise, we want to switch to a lot lower carbohydrate diet than we have to regular.
Diet, I would say diet wise.
I hate the diet though.
Fueling is your body fat.
Yeah. Using training your body, use your own stored body fat for fuel by going lower carbs. So non-starchy carbs, and choosing more protein and fat for your food. But during that transition, 1 to 4 weeks, however it might be for that individual, their exercise should be matching that fueling. Should we just be doing the low heart rate maffetone type of training to build that fat adaptation process?
If you're older, like if you're in 40s, and once you get that adaptation,
Mm.
when you make that shift, you probably have to bump your maffetone up. I've seen way too many high carb athletes have to go up 10 to 20 beats a minute increase in order to see the gains of heart rate training, maximum aerobic function or maffetone method training, because there's a fundamental shift in your physiology when you become fat adapted. Whereas when Phil did originally develop that, he was developing it with people who are on relatively high carb diets. They were fit. And back then, I've got the first editions of some of Phil's books. His idea of carb restriction was going from white grains to whole grains and doing some mild restriction, which is typical in those when you're working with elite athletes. Okay. So we see that the MAF works really good with young athletes, really young elite athletes, but also with people who are coming from transitioning from high carb to low carb initially, and then they'll have to raise their heart rate up because they just can do better. Otherwise, I've seen it consistently, and this has been since about 2010 or 12, working with various athletes. If they're fat adapted, they plateau really quickly. Like if they're running, they're walking the hills, any incline, they're walking all of a sudden to keep their heart rate down.
Yes.
And then when I get them to raise it up and say, just take the data, go by feel, it's like 15 to 20 beats a minute higher. And they say, I feel fine. I could sustain it. And that's when you see the training gains.
Well, that's where I think it's ideal if we could do a metabolic test, exercise test, and a resting test to really find out where are we starting. If you can do a metabolic testing, as the metabolic carts we were talking about before, the Pinoy cart that I didn't buy, but I was going to this fall perhaps. But so you can test and see what you are individually, where your fat burning range is now, match that with nutrition. And then you should be even more a fat adapted athlete to be able to train at higher heart rates and still burn more fat with the combination of the fueling and the training.
That's exactly right. And keep in mind, as I said earlier, this is a dynamic environment. So as you move along that fat adapted journey, that's going to change too. I mean,
but then I always talk when I'm coaching people individually, I feel like every coaching call, it starts with, what's your stress? Because people are doing all the right things, but still can't get results. Then we look at what I call the holistic method. Look at these 8 elements. Are you, doing sleep prioritizing your sleep? Are you managing your external stressors? Do you have hidden internal stressors? Because that throws everything out of whack. So I think that's a whole other section, but those people that
you've heard
stuff.
You've heard me say this over and over again. Chronic stress is as big a problem as too many carbs in the diet.
Yes.
And you're not going to because chronic stress puts us in a fight or flight modality, which in terms of the physiological reactions gets you back to burning sugar again. And so you're never going to be a really good fat burner till you kind of chill a little bit and get in the zone. So anyway, let's just keep moving. So we got the FASTER study. And so after FASTER study came out, I was hoping this would lead to looking at some of the other variables, because all those athletes were not doing straight keto to be able to perform. And that never realized, I realized that Steve and Jeff had gotten what they wanted, and they thought it was all about the diet, because that's their inherent bias, is that the diet trumps all. And like I say, is it a tool? It's a big tool. It's a huge tool, right? But and I know, because we work in the real world, stress is a big thing. Too many carbs are a big thing. VESPA is a great tool. Making sure your hydration is on point, and knowing when to take carbs. Those are all huge factors that have to be vetted. And that's why there's limitations. This is another thing that the audience really has to take in. There's limitations to science because they're trying to control the variables, right? And the real world doesn't work that way. And so, you have to take that melding of the real world to the science. So the science helps us understand the physiology and the data to help us tweak our thing, but it's really about the real world. So don't discount the real world results that athletes are getting, and don't discount your own real world experience. I mean, trust yourself, trust your coach. and you'll get results. So anyway, I started looking for ways I could start building data and approaching people. So it took various things, but in about 2017 or 2018, I got a metabolic cart, but it didn't work, and it was just too cumbersome to carry around because it was a parvo.
Oh.
And it's just, I got some good, interesting results when I ran a couple of tests. I was like, oh, wow, we're going below 0.7.
Wow.
I thought, and I'd calibrated it right and all that, but it's like, oh, this isn't good. But anyway, and then Jeff Browning did some independent testing and showed he was able to burn over 2 grams a minute. And so we just continue to do some looking around, and I was introduced to Dr. Derek Marks at St. Mary's University in Moraga. And so, we're doing some independent metabolic testing with Jeff at Utah State, and just trying to develop this thing. And then we got a pilot study done in, let me pull that up right now. Let me see if I got it right here.
Yeah, so it's good to have the studies to look at metabolic cart when you're running people, and these athletes you are testing in this new test, they've been training. What's their kind of base? They already are fat adapted. They're men, not women in there.
Let me pull up this poster here. So in 2019, the fall of 2019, let me share my screen. You want to enable me?
I had to find that button here. Ooh.
So
you should be able to share screen now.
Yeah. Okay. So this in 2019, this pilot study came out on VESPA. It was a blind study. So, and it was showing basically that VESPA does have an effect in increasing fat burn, Vo2 max, and ventilatory threshold. So so we had some anecdotal evidence. We went beyond the anecdotal evidence here with an actual pilot study. But the problem was the study got started in the late fall of 2019. And then guess what happened?
Oh, that
thing nobody wants to, that thing and
our pandemic.
Yeah, the thing nobody wants to talk about, it happened, and that's where we left it. So we're hoping to pick up with a formal blind study for publishing this fall. So
okay, good.
And anybody that really understands how science works, it'll take into the early winter at best to get the data. And then they got to go through the stats and write it up.
Takes a long time.
Right. So probably won't get submitted for publication for peer review until May or June of the following year. And so publication will probably be the summer if it stays on track. So
we'll get the early version, like when you find out.
So the point is, nobody like you, Stephanie, me, my team, the world can't wait with the pandemic and everything else. The world can't wait for the science to catch up.
We're still training and racing and trying to work on our performance.
Right. And we can't wait because, a large part of the reason we haven't been able to develop the studies, we don't have the funding to do that, because what we do at VESPA and what we do at OFM costs money. It's people's labor, the ingredients of VESPA are expensive. When you look at a lot of the studies that are getting done, they're being funded by entities who have products or services that can make a lot of money. And so that's how it kind of works, folks. And that's why a lot of studies that get paraded out and as proof that this works is because there's a money. There's a big money component. So,
well, with everything, I would say, look who's behind it, like who's financing that. So with all the research that comes out in all areas of our world, I would say, who funded that study? Who's behind that decision?
And unfortunately, academia is they've got to an addiction to that funding source, and they have to
Yeah.
play the game if they want to keep funding, and you want to keep tenures, publish or perish. And and with things changing with government and funding sources from government, there's not as much grant money, so they're the sources are coming from a lot more private entities that have
Yeah.
agendas, and unfortunately a lot of those agendas are based on maximizing shareholder return.
So here's an idea, because I know people are going to want some takeaways here. So what if we can give people their own experiment protocol to do? How could they do kind of a take-home homework assignment for people to experiment on if they're fat adapted already, if they've been listening to podcasts, we've had this over 10 years. Hopefully most people that are fat adapted, they're training. How could they test? So like a protocol that would create baseline. If we're doing, say, a long run on Sunday, my typical day, I'll use my world as an example. What would I do timing wise, fueling before that workout? Or even I just recorded a video of my performance last weekend. It starts with how we are fueling the day before and strategic carb placing. Because I did example, side note, last weekend is in Austin. I didn't eat much all day because I was at PaleoFX and ate meat. And I had no energy on Sunday morning on my long run. It was like, I didn't have any carbs. So what
I
should
see
we
your
do?
beautiful canine teeth there, Debbie. You have a beautiful set of canine teeth there.
So I think it'd be good kind of example, what we can give people to do, tests like VESPA. If we say morning run, I have a little coffee. Maybe I like little heavy cream, cinnamon, and then 30 minutes before you go on your run, have a VESPA with water. And I like to do my water with some essential aminos and some electrolytes like LMNT, Real Light, or just Redmond sea salt in it. What would you suggest as a pre-workout fuel source using VESPA to help improve that performance if you're doing, say, a 2-hour, 3-hour long run at low heart rate, working on your endurance? What would it be the study? And then how do we track, did that make a difference in my run using that fuel plan strategy and strategic carb timing the day before, maybe that evening dinner, or whatever you suggest? What would you say?
Well, typically what I tell people to do for a race is 2 nights out, have your big steak dinner, medium rare steak and a baked potato. Okay. A loaded baked potato, because you want to sneak the carbs in under a blanket of fat.
And cool. I keep reading about having your potato, cook it, and then cool it room temperature.
Yeah, you can do that, but if you're fat adapted, it really doesn't matter. I mean, that's the thing. I'm coaching more and more people. Once I see them get really well adapted, I'm coaching them. I have to tell them to bring in more carbs. It's almost,
well, we're scared to eat carbs is what happened.
Yeah. And then
carbs are evil.
Then they get adrenal stress because they're trying to perform, and the governor's keeping their performance down. They're pushing, and they get, so anyway, the medium rare steak with the loaded baked potato, just enjoy life, because you got to factor in the stress, right? You want to take the stress out. So enjoy that steak dinner that night. The next day, have a late breakfast, early lunch, and make that the main meal of your day. And then for the evening, it's really kind of a carb with a little bit of fat and a lot of salt type of thing. So, and a little bit of protein. So what I've done to a lot of people is, a lot of people like to eat sushi. So I say, go have some sushi with miso soup, because miso soup it'll give you a big sodium bolus, right? And then you get the resistant starch of the rice, but it's a grain-based thing. And milled white rice is probably the most benign of the grains. And you get all that phosphorus for ATP production. And so I tell them, go have sushi, because then you eat to satiety, so you don't break the bank eating sushi, right? Because how many times have you gone to sushi, Debbie, and come back with a $300 bill?
A lot.
Yeah. So you go and you eat to satiety, not to like keep eating, like, because carbs beget more carbs, right? And that seems to work really well. In the morning, go light, like you say, coffee with a little bit of cream. If you're somebody who's doing say a half Ironman or a 50K where you really want to rev it, you might, a couple hours out, might have a small portion of oatmeal or something, if it works for you, because I get it. A lot of people do. if you're just training, I would recommend either fasted with some, like you say, something with electrolytes. Like I just use V8 because it's concentrated. It's a hell of a sodium bolus with a bunch of potassium, but just like you, some water with some Redmond sea salt, um, or just coffee with cream, and and then take your Vespa and then let yourself settle in for a couple of hours. Because if you're fat adapted, you won't feel like eating for the first couple hours anyway, and then bring those carbs in strategically in small shots. The reality is I don't use gels anymore unless I'm doing some big run where I could use 100 calories, but I rarely use a gel anymore. I just use like bit of honey, like a 20 calorie, 30 calorie hit of some little sweet. Say I got a hill I'm coming up with. You do that and you get your hydration on point. I can't stress the hydration. That's why, like you say, making sure your blood volume's up when you do it. I wouldn't overhydrate. Prehydrating is one of the worst things you can do.
Because people overhydrate
because people tend to over drink water and underdo the sodium. And what happens is your body has to osmotically balance that water with electrolytes. So it recruits all the readily available reserves in your liver to meet that osmotic potential. And then you end up peeing it all out because your body isn't going to hold on to all that fluid. And then the next day, those readily available reserves of sodium you need to balance it, because it's dynamic, right? You can do the best you can to balance your electrolyte intake there, but it's never going to be perfect. It's a moving target.
But let me throw in though real quick, hold that thought if you're still talking, sorry. But I think when you're doing a 2-hour run or 3 hours, you do a lot of training with trail runners that are going, ultras. But I think a lot of people don't know when it's okay to eat, or they fast the whole run. And you're in our keto endurance Facebook group page. There's a lot of people that won't do anything. And I feel like that intuitive fueling, intuitive training word always comes to mind. Like, when should you have something? Because I think people be so tough and override those feelings.
If it's only a 2-hour run, if you go in properly hydrated,
yes,
and it's not like scorching hot and humid, you should be fine. We have all we have on board, in terms of fluid, electrolytes, energy to do a run. If you're fat adapted, you should have no trouble going through in even say 70-degree weather, 74-degree weather, and like I said, it's a moving target. Right now, this time of year, you should be able to do a 72-degree run for 2.5 hours on nothing, just out the door. Vespa, go and feel great at the end. Now, this moving target, like right now, it's if it was 75 or 77, you'd probably feel like you get cooked. Whereas by August of this year, 77 is going to feel cool.
Yeah.
Because you've gotten that heat acclimatization. And so you be able to go out for 2.5 hours in 75, 77-degree, 80-degree temperatures, not even think about it. But if you're going longer as an endurance athlete, hydration is really a key point when you're fat adapted. I mean, you might, if you're trying to perform, some calories are needed, but it's not like something that's going to be super hyper crucial.
Okay. So going back to your study, so if we're trying to do a VESPA study in performance and seeing how we can improve or extend our fat burning range and burn more fat at higher heart rates, how could we do that just on our own without being hooked up?
Why don't we do this? Let's show the people what's possible.
Yeah, let's show those
talk
test
about
results.
this test, and then we'll talk about, okay, here's what these guys are doing, and this is what we've done. So
that's why I want to buy the Pinoy testing cart this fall, because at least you can get some guesstimate with, like, show people visually what's happening.
Or
testing cart.
Even pay to get a metabolic test, because I noticed, I just saw online UC Davis here in Sacramento, they do it. You can do a Vo2 Max for $100.
Wow, that's a good price.
And that's on a Parvo Medics or a
Parvo's. Parvo's the best, or what's the other one?
Or a Med Graphics. Those are the two best. So anyway,
let's pop up those test results. You guys have to watch the YouTube channel if you're listening.
So anyway, I was finally put in contact with somebody. I was asking one of my clients and coaches and about this. And he said, yeah, there's somebody I know that can help you on this. And I was put in touch with Anna Sanders, who's an MS in exercise physiology. She coached soccer at ASU, and she does testing services in the Phoenix area, Scottsdale. And so I have a pocket of athletes there. So I recruited, we had actually 10, 11 athletes scheduled, but then one got COVID. So he and the other guy who were coming down from Salt Lake City weren't going to come. We said, don't come. And then another gal dropped. And so we ended up with 6 people.
6 men or women in
5
there?
men, 5 men, 1 woman.
Then do you know what day of her cycle she was on?
I did not ask that question.
That's the secret tip,
I don't know
guys.
her. I don't know her that well to have asked
But
that
that
question.
should be part of the study. I just have an amazing podcast, Dr. Mindy. We're mapping out the cycle and their exercise.
Debbie, you don't have to tell me that. That's like huge. You know,
No, that'd be
it depended-
fascinating.
but
Okay,
the-
go on. Sorry.
But anyway, so the men were all fat adapted, VESPA, OFM people. The woman was a high carb person who used VESPA on occasion. So anyway, traditional, but she's an elite level. She does them. She's done the Olympic marathon trials and done well at it. So she's running sub 240 marathons, and she does ultras, etc. So so
these people are all like fast, ultra professional level, not just like
it's
regular
people-
age groupers.
Well, these guys are, except for Anthony, who's I think 29 or 30. The rest of them are in their 30s and 40s. Like Nick Curry, the guy who set the American 24-hour record, he's in his 30s. He's got a day job as a developer with Google. Peter Mortimer's a medical device sales tech rep that he's in his 40s. He won the Hurt 100. And then of course Jeff Browning, who's 50.
But I mean, they're all fast. Is there any one that, I mean, it would be great to test people that do a 2-hour half marathon?
We actually, it's kind of funny because one of my clients who's a retired pediatrician, she says, if you need 60-year-old female test subjects,
Yeah.
I'm in. And we plan to do that. This is the start.
Okay. I'm in on the next one. I'm going to give
Right, because I'm trying to
females.
remember, I'm trying to control variables here, and as you got to admit, as a female, women
It's
are
hard.
all over. They're all over the place, emotionally, psychologically, menstrually.
Yep.
I love the
So-
challenge. But man,
That's why that's why I was asked now, were there females in that study? Because those
Yeah.
results might be different. So let's show these results because I'm going to run out of time with you
let's
again.
start looking at
And I'm sweating in here. It's hot.
I'm going to cherry pick the data for starters just to kind of show you what's possible. And yeah, I'm going to share the screen. And
And while you're doing that, I'll just speak about the podcast. I got the show notes printed out with Dr. Mindy Pels and I for female athletes. We wrote out day 1 to end of your cycle. Here's how to match your fueling training, fasting windows for athletes. So it's great info. But so Peter is showing
Peter Mortimer.
fast, steady.
Okay, so
Fasted,
and I've got a
steady.
little kicker. There's context. That's right. It's individualized and there's variables. But this
So
is
the
his.
blues
This is his
fat.
Vo2 Max test. This is the third one he took because the one he took the weekend we did the testing in February, the machine broke. He was the last one to be tested, and as soon as we raised the gradient,
He busted it.
it stopped, and it's like whoa. But anyway, let's back up. So we had 6 people. The protocol was a VESPA 20 minutes before, and then a half-hour warm-up outdoors, just an easy jog warm-up, 30-minute warm-up. They got on the treadmill, and then they started once the machine started registering and calibrating data, you see this little jump,
Yeah.
Start test. We started out at 6 miles per hour. And then every 4 minutes, we bumped it up half a mile an hour, a 2% gradient, 6 miles an hour. So every 4 minutes, we bumped it up half a mile an hour till we reached 9 miles an hour. Because unfortunately, this treadmill would shut off at 10 miles an hour. So we didn't want to get any closer than that. So we kept that 9 mile an hour buffer, which is moving along pretty fast, right? That's a
Yeah.
pretty
And
decent
then
rate.
you move the incline
And
up.
then we started raising the incline 1% every 4 minutes. So, because that's what we had to work with. So here's the thing. Now, I want to provide some context here because this is what people interested in this. You hear all the time how fat is meant for low intensity or medium intensity. And now that fat adaptation has become a thing, and because of faster, we know that you can do that, right? We can do more fat. So the science before faster suggested athletes were able to burn 1 gram a minute at most. Most people would burn, the science suggested that most people would burn between 1/2 and 3/4 of a gram, but there were some outliers that burned up to 1 gram a minute. Okay, prior to faster. Faster busted that completely open by saying you could burn the low carb cohort burned 1.5 grams a minute, and John Rutherford burned 1.78 grams a minute during faster. But remember, faster was keto. They
For a
controlled the
year,
variable.
right? Wasn't that a year long they were keto?
No,
the
they were
faster
not a year
studies?
long. No, they were fat adapted for that's the point. They said the inference was keto. They weren't doing keto. They were doing OFM.
Well, I know Ben Greenfield was doing fasted or keto for an entire
No,
year.
he
when
was
did
doing
that.
OFM. He was doing OFM. He
'Cause
just
I was working with them at Iron. He was doing Ironman that year too, and everything. So, anyways, so
yeah.
question on
Yeah,
the
so
phases though. Before each stage was how long? Because the overall test, he didn't get to
4 minutes.
VO2.
4 minutes.
Wow, that's a long time on a treadmill. So 50 minutes. Because note when people do a normal metabolic testing cart, they never do the stages long enough to really see the adaptation to that pace.
Right.
And
And here's the thing. The gal who did it, she's done thousands of metabolic tests. She says, I've never seen data like this before.
Yeah, well, these guys are
Yeah.
good examples.
So I want to frame this. So 1 gram a minute before faster, 1.5 grams average is faster, up to 1 3/4 on faster, right? Okay, we knew several people in faster. Anthony was actually in faster too. So Anthony was the guy who's done, he was in this testing round. So we all knew there was more out there, not just with fat, but just overall metabolic capacity. So here's the interesting thing about this test. 1100, you see my cursor?
Yep.
Okay. 1100 kcals an hour is 2.03 grams per minute.
Okay. On
Okay.
the side. Yep.
That's 1100 kcals an hour. Look here.
Wow.
For 10 minutes, he was burning over 2 grams a minute.
That's why they're so lean. They're burning so much fat.
Right. But and Peter's a big guy, but that's just unheard of.
Yeah.
It's
Now-
it's like you don't see people burning over 2 grams a minute.
So question, do you have the same protocol with him without taking VESPA?
Yes,
If he
I
just
do.
did it fasted? Because
No,
it'd
I'm
be
gonna-
good to
I'm
see
gonna show-
compare
I'm gonna
with
show
VESPA
you-
and without.
I'm going to show you we ran 2 tests, and we're going to go through this, but we actually did the test fasted first, and then 24 hours later we did
Okay.
fasted with VESPA. So I was purposely shunting it against VESPA because anybody who's taken a VO2 max test knows you burn matches because you go to exhaustion.
Yes, it's not fun. At the
No, you go
end.
right.
And you have
so-
the thing stuck in your mouth and you're trying to,
Right.
so it's not comfortable.
It's not comfortable and it's not fun, but you go to exhaustion. So you go glycolytic. So when you get to the end, here's the interesting. He not only went over 2 grams a minute for over 10 minutes, but he never crossed over. That crossover where carbs and fat burn
Metabolic
more.
crossover point was way further over.
That's not even a thing. That's where the test ended.
Oh, look at that. So they didn't have the intersection of the
He didn't
carbs
even
to
cross
fat.
over.
Sheesh.
So yeah.
So you need him to, what was the end percentage of grade incline?
I think he got up to 5 or 6%. Like he just went out on forever.
Huh.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So
Okay.
let me pull up let me stop the share and then I'll pull up his fasted.
So I used to do metabolic testing for years. So that's why I'm asking probably too many questions if people are listening.
No, no.
'Cause I love doing this. That's why I was going to buy.
Have you seen people get, have you ever had anybody yield that kind of data?
No. Well, I was testing normal people though. And this was back in 2005 to 2010. When did New Leaf quit? New Leaf got bought out by Lifetime Fitness, probably 2012 maybe. And that's when it got taken away from me. But I was testing people at rest and exercise, treadmill and bike for years on and off, but they were just regular athletes, not pro. But what I did learn while you're pulling that up is when you're doing a resting test or an exercise test, end of the day, now I know what I know. The impact of chronic stress on how your every stress response is a blood sugar response really shows up when you do these tests. When people come from work, sitting in traffic, they totally skew the results because they were in sugar burning because they were just in sympathetic. So doing the test in the morning made a huge difference when I trained people. Okay, did you find it?
Yep. I'm almost tech led. You have to explain. So this is his fasted test. And you can see he's a solid fat burner.
Yep.
Almost 2 grams a minute is peak fat oxidation, but he was hovering at about 0.8 for the whole time, 0.75 grams per minute or 1 point, just under a gram a minute most of the time. This is fasted. And then he crossed over after you hit VO2 max, because your crossover is where you up to VO2, but he crossed over between his he crossed over just before he hit anaerobic threshold.
So that crossover point compared to the previous chart, you can't put them on the same screen, can you? You have to make a blog about this.
Yeah.
You're not tech savvy as I am. I'm not either.
I'm not.
But if you could put them side by side, that would be great, because then you can kind of write circles and highlight.
Well, it's both are irrelevant because he technically did not cross over.
Well, can you have run that test? The other one, it was already to exhaustion because he stopped if you kept incline up.
So here's a good one. Here's a couple we'll pull up.
We just have 5 more minutes to just give you a time frame.
This is interesting. This is Lauren's, and she's the female.
Yay for female athletes.
Yay for female athletes. Okay. And she's a high carb athlete. So she crossed over at 87%. So this shows the fast. She's metabolically healthy, right? She's really fit. She uses VESPA sometimes. She just came off a week before of running a hard 100K.
Wow.
So she was super aerobically fit. So she crossed over at 87%, fasted, and peak fat oxidation at 1 gram. So for a female, that's smoking. Okay, that's fasted. Now this shows the power of fasting, because on the second day,
well, you're saying power of fasting, you're speaking regarding fasted exercise, not doing a 24-hour fast.
In terms of how it influences fat oxidation, because she burned her matches that first day, because on the second day,
look at that. She wasn't recovered.
She wasn't recovered. She crossed over at 33%. So she burned some matches. I mean, this is why I'm such a big deal about this.
This is huge right here for people to listen and learn from, because those 2 treadmill tests, night and day, because she was not recovered. People would look at their heart rate variability, look at their recovery scores, and adjust their workout.
Just go by their feel, but this is what.
Well, people don't know how to do that.
24 hours of that. She crossed over 37. Now with the VESPA, and here's the interesting thing: with the VESPA, she was actually able to push longer, a minute or 2 longer, a little over a minute longer, almost a minute and a half longer to her VO2 max, and just over a minute longer to her AT. We saw that consistently on the second day, that threshold between VO2 max and AT closed.
So your summary is that VESPA, having it when you are doing a fasted workout, which means for women, we say 12 to 15 hour overnight fast with a VESPA compared to no VESPA, it will give you longer endurance and help you burn a higher percentage of fat longer.
No, what we're seeing here is the VESPA works to burn more fat, but what's happening, that fat's a different story. What the VESPA is doing here, I think, I'm speculating, but I think based on experience, is it's still allowing her to go longer, harder, but instead of, because she burned those matches the first day, right?
Yes.
That fat's being converted into glucose, because the liver in a metabolically fit person, liver fat can be converted into glucose if glucose is the necessary fuel. Like if you're doing high end stuff where it's both you need quick fuel source and oxygen's the limiting factor, the liver will there's hepatic gluconeogenesis.
Yeah. Well, you hope it's fat burning, and then she can go longer.
It is
not burning
fat,
muscle.
it is fat. It's not burning muscle. No, this is a very well thought out pathway, but it's not known well because most people aren't getting anywhere near being fat adapted or in ketosis to where the body can do it. It's actually a part of the whole thing with runaway type 2 diabetes, because the liver, the glucagon signaling gets messed up, and then you get runaway hepatic gluconeogenesis, and people can't keep their blood sugar down. So yeah, it's the liver has this way, but because people have too much carbs in their diet, we don't know about it. So everybody thinks you make glucose by burning protein, and you catabolize muscle, and that's the main role of aminos when you're taking aminos for this. It's not that they're doing anything like they try to suggest. It's most of those aminos you take for exercise are being converted to glucose. So that's Lauren's, but that's the impact of that. Now here we'll do Jeff Browning's, because Jeff just
real quick. I just have another minute.
Yeah, I know Jeff. Here's Jeff's fasted, and once again, he doesn't even cross over. And he came off a week where he was doing mountain runs, keeping it in a real good fat burning zone, rested coming into this. He's burning 2.5 grams a minute, almost 2.6 grams a minute is peak fat oxidation. So he's running it. Here's 1100, between 1200. So look at this. Most of the test he's running at over 2 grams a minute. Okay. Now, and then we go and look at Jeff the next day. And again, he's able to go longer, but guess what? He burned some matches the day before.
Mm-hmm.
So his peak fat oxidation went down, his carbohydrate use went up, but he actually went longer compared to the day before.
So I guess a big question for people probably is, like, normal athletes, how do they get to be like this? They want to look at their metabolic test.
Of course, they need to restrict carbohydrates and use strategic carbohydrates, but they need to use VESPA. They need to get their vitamin D up. They need to know how to hydrate based on conditions, intensity levels. All those things are really key to really good fat adaptation.
So
they don't need to stress.
Yeah, no stress, but that's the constant
exercise
right. I have people work on.
So like making people run fast on glucose is real easy, because it just falls into that fight or flight thing where you need immediate fuel, and it's simple because glucose is used for fight or flight energy, and all it does is it's crisis management. Drop everything to just get away from that. Fat metabolism is extremely complex, because you're not only burning it for fuel, but everything else that your body is made of, your skin, your hair, your cells, your hormones, your enzymes, it's done off of fat metabolism. So it's not just an energy source, it's everything else.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it's real complex in terms of the sciencey part, but if you try to do that, it's hard. It's actually very doable in the real world if you just can buy into it and relax about it, not try to micromanage everything. It's you just have to, once you get yourself fat adapted, it's relatively easy. You know it, Debbie. I know it. It's not hard to do. And as long as you're really active, it goes back to my 3 constants. 1, you're an individual. 2, we're meant to burn fat aerobically. And here's the other thing. 3, we're meant to move a lot. And it's not just one modality, it's all of them. We need to have that big aerobic envelope, and we need to have that duration, but we also need to do intervals. We do need to do tempo. We do need to do resistance stuff. And there's ways of doing that where you can continually leverage that ability to burn fat, because you want to burn fat, because the more you can burn fat, it's not only going to improve your performance, but you're going to reduce the oxidative stress, the lactate load, all those damaging effects of too much glucose burn.
Yeah.
One of the last things I will pull up here is,
And while you're doing that, and I have like 0 minutes, but the strategic carb timing, people can learn more on your website. But I think that's a confusing part for people learning about this fasted exercise, that it means adding more carbohydrates the evening before the workout. And sometimes when necessary before a workout for some people might do better depending on the workout. Afterwards, any tips you want to throw in there while you're pulling that up?
what's that?
Strategic carb timing. I know working with Ben Greenfield, we suggest, more carbs at nighttime dinner for your morning workout.
Yeah, exactly. I would rather see people bring the carbs in the evening, and then go light the morning of. You got to trust the system. And it's really about, a lot of this fat adaptation for me is about personal empowerment. You got to trust yourself. You got to trust your body is going to be there to deliver.
Intuitive fueling and training once you're fat adapted.
Like I say, and I'm going to go off on my Peter thing, but we've been sold, told, and controlled into thinking we have to have all this external stuff, this gel every 20 or 30 minutes. Otherwise you're going to bonk. And it's a big fat lie, folks.
Once you're fat adapted.
Right. But you have to empower yourself to know you have the power inside of you first. And then, bringing in the gel for that extra boost, that makes total sense. I'm not poo-pooing it, but
when there's time for it.
Everybody's scared that they're missing something, this supplement or that thing. It's like, once you know it, it's like people know that they can go out on a race and they can get, if they have their VESPA and their hydration all worked out, as long as they get they can get whatever they want off the aid station and go with it. So let me share this.
Okay. I've got a call to get to. So finish up with this and then we'll put it all in the show notes.
Okay. This is Jesse Haynes, and he actually was the most stressed out. He'd gotten up at 3 a.m. to drive from LA to Phoenix for this. So he was the only one we did a resting metabolic rate test on. And this is his he's burning 100% fat, even though he was the least in shape for the test. He was burning 100% fat, resting metabolic rate. And here's this one here is what the goal is for a healthy athlete. That's metabolic efficiency. You know this thing, Debbie. 70% fat, 30% carbs is what an athlete should be at, is 70-30. And yet Jesse's 100%. And this is where the longevity, the metabolic health all come in, is when you're burning fat through beta oxidation, you're not going to be causing the damage to recover from. You're going to slow that aging process to a crawl. So you're not only going to perform better, you're going to be better.
Yep. I can't wait to do testings. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can get any of those slides. We can throw in some pictures in the show notes and put it with the video into a vlog and connect it to your site. So thank you, Peter. Great info.
What you need, and we'll get it to you.
All right. Thanks.